folks out in television land. ESCI's consultant, Sheldon Gilbert, will be leading a dialogue with the elected officials from those agencies that are interested in moving forward, or at least having a discussion about moving forward at this time with the fire service consolidation efforts that have been talking about and in process for the last 3 years at least. And Sheldon will be the facilitator of the meeting. We are live on Zoom and live on television for those of you that are here. We have 2 participants, I believe, one from City Council on Zoom, Kelly Menke, and I guess I'll turn it over to Sheldon to move through the process. And
can we confirm legal counsel's on?
David is on. Legal counsel is on the Zoom.
And what is David's last name?
David Riss, R-I-S.
Okay, got it. All right. All right, well, good evening, everyone who's here in person and who's online. This has been a long time coming to have this discussion tonight, and I think it'll be a good opportunity for everyone to make sure that we have a clear understanding of what the analysis has shown to date and can get our questions answered by those who are considering moving forward in this process. I certainly will go over the history and do a brief overview of the presentation that I've been giving to all of the boards and councils the last few days. But before we do, maybe we could do a quick introduction so we can figure out who's here and make sure we know who's here representing what organization. So obviously my name is Sheldon Gilbert, and I am here representing ESCI, the consulting firm that has been doing the analysis on this consolidation effort for the last 2 years, 2+ years. So, sir?
Ron Huber, Amity Fire District.
Okay.
Dean Schultz, Amity Fire District.
Marie Sproul, City of Lafayette.
Okay.
Adam Gorman, Councilor, City of McMinnville.
Okay. Gentlemen behind me here.
I'm Steve Leonard, Chairman Rural, McMinnville Rural.
Okay.
Phil Frischman, McMinnville Rural.
McMinnville. And then Chiefs.
Terry Lucic, Fire Chief, Carlton Fire District, and the City of Lafayette.
Okay.
Scott Lott, Training Chief, Fire in Amity.
Great. Chief, would you like to?
Rich Liker, McMinnville Fire.
Jeff Howery, McMinnville City Manager.
Debbie McDermott, McMinnville Fire. Amy Hannigan, McMinnville Fire. And then we'll have 2 people virtually that want to introduce.
Okay, so can we have the 2 individuals who are officially representing their board or council on Zoom introduce themselves?
Kelly Menke, City Councilor for McMinnville.
Okay. Okay, and then Mr. Riss?
David Riss with the Local Government Law Group out of Eugene, Oregon.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for being here. I think everyone has heard this presentation over the last week, so I'm not going to give it in its entirety, but I would like to scan through it and just give a little bit of an overview as to how we got to where we're at. I don't know that Mr. Riss has had the opportunity to see it, and certainly there are folks who are either on Zoom or on the YouTube channel that have not. So this process started over 2 years ago with a study for Yamhill and South Polk County to look at the opportunities for consolidations. Out of that came a recommendation that the northern Yamhill area look at opportunities for consolidations. And we subsequently did analysis on the northern Yamhill County departments and presented that, and then asked those who were interested in moving forward to what we're going to call our scenario 3 or our final analysis. And those organizations that said they wanted to continue in that analysis were Dundee and Dundee Rural, McMinnville and McMinnville Rural, Lafayette, New Carlton, and Amity Fire District. Dayton Fire District chose not to participate after the initial study or after the initial analysis. Subsequent to these presentations and what has been happened the last few days before we came to this meeting, the Dundee City and Rural District have decided that they are not going to pursue this process any further. And we've been advised that New Carlton is no longer going to participate in the process at this time. That does not mean that they may not be interested in working together and doing things down the road, or if something else occurs, even doing IGAs down the road. But for the formation of a northern district, they are at this time choosing not to participate any further. So that means we have the remaining potential participants in the room, and that is McMinnville, McMinnville Rural, Lafayette, and Amity. Okay, so that's where we're at. As I stated, this was based on the initial study, the subsequent modeling, and then we're going to talk tonight about next steps and moving forward for those agencies who want to move forward in the formation of this northern district. The study purpose was to look at the fiscal structure and the operational structure of all the organizations that want to participate and analyze whether it's viable and sustainable and operationally beneficial to be able to do this. I'm going to just scroll through a couple of these. So one of the things we wanted to look at is for those potential participating districts, we wanted to see what the top line revenue was doing. We modeled the increases from 2010 to 2019 at a 2% annual increase, which is fairly common for what was being used for budgeting purposes. And then we overlaid on the top the actual performance from 2010 to 2019, where it shows that the participating districts and cities exceeded the 2% escalator a year, and pretty significantly from 2010 to 2013 and 2016 to 2019. What does that mean? That means that when we did this model, we did it conservatively with a 2 to 3% increase annually, but your performance is historically and now doing much better than that, so the top line revenue will probably outperform the estimates. And then we also, for the costing model, anticipated 3% increase for cost of living, 3% increase for benefits, and a 3% increase for supplies and services, so a compounding 9% annually, which is probably going to be a little high, but with the inflation doing what it's doing, it may not be. But that's the assumptions in the models that we're going to show you. So the first thing that we did is we modeled it at 1.5, which has kind of been considered a floor to even consideration for this district, and would it be sustainable at that level? I can tell you of all the participating districts, if you average together their current levy mill rates, they come in a little over 1.3. So 1.5 is kind of just above the average of what what the districts and jurisdictions are doing currently. And you will see that even with adding a couple people a year for a total of 10 over that 5 or 6 year stretch, you can see that the district cash flow goes in the red in 2024, 25, and 26. Now granted, if you form this district and move forward, and we'll talk about timing a little bit later tonight, obviously 2021 isn't going to happen, but we did have to begin the modeling somewhere, so that's what we did. We started there and went out 6 years. So that's what happens if you did the 1.5. You do maintain at least a 17+% reserve to your total top line revenue, which is a GASB recommendation for fire districts. So it is by definition sustainable. However, that would begin to go down as each year you would go more and more in the red, unless something changed with expenses or revenue significantly. We then went ahead and modeled it at 2 mills, and you can see here, this is the same that you just looked at on the left. The chart on the right shows what would happen if you did this at 2 mills, and you were able to add approximately 29 bodies over a 6-year period. You can see that you're able to maintain that. Your lines don't cross until the 6th year, and that is minimally, and this would allow you to add those 29 personnel, and we'll talk a little bit about why that's important a little later in the presentation because of your current capabilities as it relates to first due response as well as an effective response force. This is another look at 1.5 and 2 mills for this district, what it would look like from your available fund balance or reserves. And you can see that at 1.5 mills, you start out at 7. You have a pretty big capital expenditure in 2021 for a fire station. And then it begins to matriculate along right at about $4 million, which is an acceptable reserve rate, but you do start to go down and close in year 25 and 26. And you'll see at the 2 mill rate This would allow the district to have some room to add staff, to add innovative and incentivized programs for volunteer participation, as well as capital, to be able to move forward over the 6-year model. And as I stated, your revenue is probably going to outperform this model, and the expenses will probably be fairly accurate, if not a little high. So this should be an under-promise and over-deliver model. As I stated, as far as getting full-time equivalent positions, we do that for the purposes of doing a calculation using the average cost of a full benefited and total compensated firefighter, paramedic, and you would get between 10 at 1.5 and 28 at the previous model. And then at this latest model, you can get 10 new positions over that 6 years, or 29 at 2 mills. And the 10 positions basically would create an adequate amount of fill for what we call your employee replacement rate as it relates to leave and utilization. You really wouldn't gain any ground. Whereas with 29, that would be new bodies on new apparatus that would give you increased capabilities. This is just an example of what the bodies could look like and what we used in the model. You can see here that on the 1.5 mil model, you added 2 bodies a year, 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 over this, the 5-year modeling period. And at the 2 mil, you added 8, and then another 8, and then another 8, and then 3, and then 2, for a total of 29. So you can see that you have greater capability and sustainability to increase your service levels and your capabilities as a district. Some of the general findings, moving from the finances to the operations, we did a very detailed, what we call standard of cover, where we took and we accumulated all of the call data, all of the response data, all the operational data, and did a number of tests and models, and came up with a number of findings. One of them is that every jurisdiction is currently doing, to the best of their ability, trying to maximize their capabilities. That's really good. This would give them opportunities to do even more. There's a very distinctive risk and response difference between several of the jurisdictions. You truly have urban areas, suburban areas, rural areas, and wilderness areas, which provides for what we would call a complex risk profile. However, you do have a lot of varying resources and capabilities within the departments as they exist. They got to where they are for a reason, and they're equipped reasonably well and trained reasonably well to deal with those types of emergencies. If you all came together, you would be able to leverage those expertise and unique capabilities, have better standardization, increased coordination, and increased capability through a unified fire district. Why do we care? This is something that is an important educational piece as to why we even do a study as to whether regional fire protection is called for or beneficial. And I would just say this, within 7 to 10 minutes, you have a very critical series of events that happen in a fire. It's called the time temperature curve, where that garbage can fire in the corner of the room preheats the room and the area outside the room to the point where it hits its flashover ignition point, and all of a sudden your room fire becomes a house fire. If you can interrupt that cycle within that 7 to 10 minute window, you can stop that fire damage. Subsequently, on a cardiac arrest or a significant impact to respiratory or circulatory status, if you can reverse it through defibrillation or other measures within a minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes, there's a 90+% chance you can get some sort of a sustainable heart rhythm back. As the minutes go by, it goes down into single digits that by after 10 minutes, there's close to 0% chance of survival. That's why it matters. We need to go in and break the chain of the fire process, or we need to break the chain of the physiological damage because of lack of circulation or respiration. That's why time matters. The other thing that's important to understand is when you talk about interrupting that fire, it's not only just having that one company pull a hose in and put the wet stuff on the red stuff. It's about a series of tasks, critical tasks that need to occur sequentially and sometimes simultaneously. You need a crew that can pull in the hose. You need a crew that can hook up a water supply so they don't run out of water. You need a crew available to conduct a search and rescue operation. You need a crew who can go up on a roof and do vertical ventilation to let the heated gases out so that the interior crew can make access deeper into the building for rescue and extinguishment. You need a rapid intervention crew so that someone is available if something were to happen or go bad in the house or the structure, heaven forbid, they could immediately intervene to rescue firefighters or community members. So those are all things that need to happen that that create the need for that 17 to 20 people within that 14-minute time rate that we're trying to hit. If this district were to be formed, this probably won't surprise anyone, but you would be running about 80% EMS. You would be running about 4.3% structure fires, and you'd be running about 4.6% motor vehicle accidents with a spattering of other types of calls that are smaller. Those three are pretty important because for the medical calls, you need to have the rapid response, so you need that geographic distribution. For the fire calls, on a standard suburban model, we usually see a fire incident rate of somewhere between 3.5 and 4. You're at 4.3. That doesn't mean you have a fire problem. It means you have a very unique risk profile that has a lot of different attributes to it, and you do have fires. You definitely need to have an effective response force. You definitely need to cover the geography to get there quickly for the medicals, and it's not surprising you have a good amount of vehicle accidents given the rural and wilderness type roadways that you have throughout this new district if it were to be formed. If the district were to be formed, you would see that the majority of your calls occur from 8 in the morning till 8 at night. That is when the unit hour utilization goes up. That's when your units are out of position the most. That's when the system is the most stressed. However, from 11 o'clock at night till 8 in the morning, that is when you tend to get the low frequency, high risk incidents. Structure fires and other fires go undetected longer because people are asleep and in compromised positions. You basically have emergency medical calls where people hesitate to call 911, where during the day they tend to call quicker, self-report, or spot the smoke at a smaller fire level and report it earlier. So you need to have that 24-hour coverage to be able to address this, but your system is definitely most active from 8 in the morning till 8 at night. That is pretty consistent with what we see throughout communities throughout the nation, and it does just reinforce that people and movement cause calls. There we go. This is just a scope that shows where the calls are being clustered, and I only show it to you from this perspective. If you see where your stations are and you see the storm scope images near your stations, that's a good thing. That means the calls are occurring where you're at. If we saw a lot of those storm scope images outside of where your stations are at, we would probably be making recommendations to add additional stations or move stations. We're not seeing that. So what that tells us is the focus needs to be on putting bodies and resources within the stations that exist to handle the high call volume where it's occurring. But you do have your stations properly located from our analysis and our perspective. This chart just shows, and I'll just simply say the red dots are what you need to look at. The red dots tell you that that was a response over 12 minutes. And you'll say, wow, that's right where the stations are at. And you are correct. But that's also where all the calls are, so they tended to be out of position. So you do have some reliability and stress on the system when you get into these busy modes during the day. I do know that McMinnville, who is in charge of the ambulance service area, the city just approved a number of positions to add another ambulance to specifically address the stress in the system that they're seeing in these busy response areas. But I wanted you to at least see that the calls are occurring where the fire stations are, and you are getting some stress to your system based on simultaneously calls or people out of position. This is what we call an effective response force, and I said just a few minutes ago the importance of being able to do a coordinated and choreographed fire attack with all those functions. This tells you how many people you can currently get there in 8 minutes and 14 minutes. And what it will show you, even in the areas of high density calls, within 8 minutes, you're only going to get somewhere between 4 and 6 personnel. Remember, we talked about that. You want to get them there between 10 and 15 minutes to really interrupt that fire progression. And if you measure it at 14 minutes, you're able to get somewhere between 8 and 10. Our goal is to get somewhere between 17 and 20 to the scene within that 14 to 15 minute range with a combination system, meaning you have some career folks and you have some volunteer response. That would be an ideal circumstance and a best practice, and it would be consistent with your risk profile. That is not being accomplished now, so that would be something that you would have the opportunity to fix with this new fire district at the 2 mills, and that's why those 29 bodies were included. This gives you an idea of how quickly they're arriving one behind the other. You've got the first unit arriving within 9 minutes, the second unit with almost 11, the third unit 12 and some change, the fourth unit at 15, and it's taking you 21 minutes to get that full first alarm for all those critical tasks. We would like to see if there's a way for this district, if it is formed, to move that up to this 15-minute range, 14 to 15 minutes, and that would be a more sustainable and a safer operation for both the firefighters and the community. This here is just looking at the different aspects of your call, from dispatch to turnout time and to travel time. And I would just suffice to say for this presentation, there is opportunity for you to impact all of these. Some of that involves more bodies and more apparatus that are staffed. Some of it just involves looking at your processes and your procedures and streamlining them and looking for better use of technology and better use of some of your tools. We've talked about that with the individual departments as well as the groups, and I think everybody knows there's some potential there for improvement from everything from call processing to travel time. Unit hour utilization, I'm just going to go through real quickly. All I'm going to say is that when you get 22 to 25% workload on your medic units, they're in a stress situation. That is why the McMinnville just added an ambulance to your system that will help bring those all down, hopefully around the 15% range. So here's our overall recommendations. Establish urban, suburban, and rural wilderness response goals. We had to measure everything against one goal because that's all the data that we had. But you have the opportunity to align expectations and to put rural response and suburban response and urban response goals that will best protect the citizens, will get the greatest outcomes, and will allow you to really measure all components of the system rather than looking at one standard for the whole. You definitely need to increase your 24/7 station coverage with paid staff and volunteer incentive programs. There's a number of great models out there, whether they be student programs or whether they be stipend or part paid hourly or per call. There's a lot of different ways to do that, but some of that money could definitely and should definitely be applied to incentivize and maximize your volunteer response. Continue to work with your dispatch center to shorten that call processing time, and do a good analysis on your turnout time and your impedance factors for travel time. Lastly, where do you need to add bodies? So our recommendation was, when everyone was potentially participating, was an additional truck company here in McMinnville that will really help that effective response force. This being the hub of the district, it can respond in all directions effectively. A staffed engine in Lafayette, a staffed engine in Amity, and a staffed engine at Dundee. Dundee has subsequently decided to not participate at this point, so that one would be off the table. But I do believe that even with the financial modeling, with the McMinnville Rural, Lafayette, and Amity participating, you could still get those units staffed up at those stations. If you were to do that, this gives you an idea of what your effective response force would look like. And generally now you're talking about getting anywhere from 18 to 22 people with 14 minutes. And there we've hit that goal. So that you can see the difference of being able to assemble those together and move them to the high areas of concentration and high areas of fire incident, as well as higher areas of risk and density. It will also provide opportunities to get stuff on the road quicker and more consistently for the more suburban and rural areas and wilderness areas, and it should increase your response time to get an effective response force there also. So what you have in front of you tonight is an implementation plan where we kind of need to have a very good, open, honest dialogue that will allow us to talk about all the different things it takes to form a district. We have legal counsel with us tonight to talk about what that might look like. And we can answer questions that you might have, talk about timing, talk about implementation. If there's any questions, further questions or concerns about the funding or the operations or the response, we can talk through those. And our goal tonight is for you to leave with a draft intergovernmental agreement that you can take back to your approving boards and councils and consider to participate in formation of a district and some form of cost sharing and allocation to pay for that district election. we'll talk more about the timing in a few minutes, but I think I'll stop here and I'll open it up for questions and see if we can get everybody aligned to where we're at here. And then I would like to turn it over to Mr. Riss to talk about the actual formation of a district from a legal perspective. But I'll take any questions and we can discuss anything that I've talked about so far. Okay? Well, we've been doing this all week, so I'm going to assume that questions have been asked operationally and financially. So, Mr. Riss, can you maybe give us a brief overview of the intergovernmental agreement that you've been working on and what it is that would include and kind of your thoughts on the framework moving forward for these jurisdictions that are still at the table? I think you're muted.
There we go. Thank
There
you
you
very
go.
much. Again, David Riss with the Local Government Law Group. City of McMinnville has retained me to provide some assistance with this process. While I represent the City of McMinnville, they've authorized me to do this presentation tonight for everybody. And if things move forward, the work product I developed for the city, including ballot titles and petitions and election forms, will be shared with the parties as well. The cost sharing agreement just sets forth the goals of working together, talk about the working group that's going to be together and putting together, reaching consensus about what a consolidated district would take a look like. The City of McMinnville will take a lead in providing the administrative support for this process. And there's a cost share. The City of McMinnville intends to pay 70%, with the remaining 30% to be shared equally by the parties to the agreement. However many parties participate, they would share that 30% equally. There is a provision that if the parties do get involved in polling, that would be something that would be paid by each city or each district to the extent that they utilize that service. The City of McMinnville will provide invoices for that and seek payment within 30 days. Certainly be providing legal services to the City of McMinnville, which will be available. There's a list of different things that legal services will entail. Be prepared to speak to many of those questions and issues tonight as questions come up. And the remainder of the agreement is what lawyers love the most, and that's the boilerplate, and I won't go into any detail on that. Be happy to answer any questions you might have about the cost sharing agreement.
Mr. Riss, maybe while they're looking and kind of perusing this to see if they have any questions on the structure and function of the IGA, can you kind of run through the steps and the timing of the formation of a district so that they can get some idea as to what these subsequent functions are going to be paying for, how they contribute to this process?
Yeah, thank you. The formation of a district is most likely going to be started by a petition, and it's probably going to be a petition that has a certain amount of percentage of the electors. I believe it's 15% of the electors within that territory that's going to be forming a new district would have to sign the petition. There is an option that the county board can initiate, the Board of Commissioners can initiate the formation process. But in that case, the entirety of the district has to be within the county. And since at least at this time, the Amity extends down into Polk County, that option of the county board initiating the process is not available. Petitions can also be signed by landowners. That's a little bit more difficult in these circumstances, so it's most likely that it'll be a petition of the electors. Petition has to contain certain provisions about the district. Key there, of course, is the boundary. There needs to be in advance an economic feasibility study to demonstrate that the proposed permanent tax rate will pay for the district's operation. The petition has to be, a preliminary version of the petition has to be approved by the county. And then that petition is sent out to the community by whoever wants to gather signatures, circulators. Once that is gathered, that petition is submitted to the County Board of Commissioners. The deadline for that submittal is May 12th if you're shooting for the November 2022 election. So May 12th is the date that that petition would have to be filed with the county. The earlier the better. That way any particular issues that might develop in the process, you have the time built in to be able to handle that. The county goes through a process. The County Board of Commissioners has an initial hearing, makes a determination whether it's appropriate to go forward with the formation. And if they do find that case, they will schedule an election, and that election would go through the process of submitting a ballot title. People have an opportunity to raise any concerns about the language of the ballot title, and then that's put on the ballot for the November 2022 election, at which time the voters would decide. Because the formation of a district cannot include territory of the same kind of district, all of the participating districts would have to go through a dissolution process. And that dissolution process can be initiated by the district board. There's a dissolution plan that's put together that basically says how that district is going to wrap up its affairs. In this case, it's most likely essentially transferring all of the assets and liabilities over to the new district. That goes through a process. It also goes through an election. When that election is held, if the formation is approved and all of the dissolutions are approved, it would go forward. If one of the districts does not approve a dissolution, then the formation, even if the formation is approved, it cannot go forward because there would be an existing district within a part of the territory of that new district. So all of the districts have to approve the formation of the dissolution, and the new district would have to be approved as well. It's the total vote of the entire district for the formation and district by district for the dissolution. Any cities that are within a district, within the district, also have to approve the being included, and that takes place during the formation process. That's a real overview of the process of forming a new district.
Does the formation and the dissolution have to be separate ballots, or can they be the same?
Yeah. Yes, they are.
Okay.
So you do the dissolution, and you could do them both on the same ballot, but there'd be two measures, or two.
That's my understanding. Is that correct, sir? His question is, if you want to do them both on the November ballot, they'd have to be different, or do you have to do the formation first and then do the dissolution after?
No, they would be at the same ballot.
Okay.
Just different measures.
Yeah, different measures.
Different measures, yes.
Sir?
So if the formation passes by all districts, but then there's one district that for whatever reason doesn't pass their individual dissolution, what happens?
The nothing changes.
Okay.
The formation, even though it received voter approval, cannot move forward because one of the districts is still in existence, and you can't have two districts of the same type at the same time.
Okay, thank you.
So then you just go back to ground zero and start all over with three.
The remainder.
Yeah.
You'd have to do a different ballot measure for the formation of a new district and a different election
Yeah, so if you
with the
didn't,
new boundary.
if you didn't make November, then try to come back in May. Or you could have a special election.
I think I'd let the political consultant weigh in, but I don't know how that plays. I think it would be very hard to come back quickly if you have it blow up.
And we've talked 70-30 split. Do we know what an actual dollar amount is on that 70-30 split?
That's much of the time is going to be attorney fees as we move forward, so we don't have however much we need to use. LGLI, David and his team would be about how much. We don't have 1,000, 10,000. We don't have that number.
Mr. Riss, can you discuss in the formation of the district, what statutory or regulatory options do they have as to how a board is constructed, meaning an at-large board versus a allocated board? What are the do's and don'ts of that?
A fire district is made up of 5 board members. At the first organizational meeting, there's the president, vice president, secretary, and a treasurer elected. Secretary and treasurer can be the same person. There are provisions in the statute to allow either nominations by subdistricts or elections by subdistricts. In the first case, nominations, a person is nominated within a district, but the entire district would vote on that person. In the second case, the person would be nominated and elected within a district. Those districts have to be approximately equal in population, and there can be 5 districts, or there could be some sub-districts and some at-large votes. It's all dependent on how people want to set it up when they organize it. The statutes don't provide for that process to take place during the formation. What happens is you have to form the district, and then the district board, actually the petition, the voters would petition the district board to take a look at forming sub-districts for nomination or election. And there's a process to go through to identify what those sub-districts would be, where they're located. And they go through that process, and the district board makes that decision. Then that process is, next step is it goes to election by the voters. And if they approve it, then at the next election cycle, the new district board members would be elected by district or nominated by district, depending upon how it's structured. But that doesn't take place during the formation process. It's a post-formation process that's separate.
Do I understand that to mean that there wouldn't, if we had an election in November, that we wouldn't have a board until May, perhaps, the next election? Or did I get that wrong?
My apologies, I couldn't hear very well, but the initial 5 board members would be elected at the same time as the formation election in November. But they would be elected at large throughout the entire district. But once that district is created, then the voters can petition to form sub-districts and divide up the entire district into sub-districts for election purposes in the future.
Thank you.
Are the 5 governing board members actually part of the formation resolution or vote, or is it a separate?
My apologies, I couldn't hear
So when the district formation language on the ballot, does that include the name of the 5 nominated board members?
No.
Okay.
Those board members, there would be a separate process.
Okay.
To people to file to be elected. So they would submit, just as the board members now for the separate districts, go through a similar process of submitting the forms to the county elections to be elected to the board, and that election would take place as a separate, the candidates would be on the ballot at the same time as the formation and the dissolution of the existing districts. All happens at that November 2022 election.
Got it. Any other questions regarding the formation?
So what you're saying is that the first 5 board members could be all McMinnville citizens and not spread out within all of the group. Is that what you're saying?
My apologies.
So the question was, could the full slate of the first board members be all McMinnville residents? Or how would you assure, or can you assure that there's at least some sort of representation from all the former jurisdictions that are now becoming one?
There's no mechanism to assure that takes place. Equally, they all could be from one of the other jurisdictions or one of the other districts. It's up to the individual people who want to run for election to choose to whether to run or not. But they would be elected at large.
And that's just for the initial formation. After that, the citizens of the district can petition to have sub-districts that then there'd be representation for what is currently other districts like Lafayette or Amity or McMinnville or however it wants to be structured.
That is correct.
And you did mention something there's a population trigger there. So does that mean it's not geographic? It is strictly by population. Like it'd be southwest of McMinnville and Amity and northeast of McMinnville and Lafayette to get those even population numbers throughout the districts as they split up. The sub-districts?
Yes, each of the sub-districts would have to be approximately equal in the population.
Okay, thank you.
And you mentioned the possibility of at-large positions as well. How would that work? You'd have like 3 by representation of 3 different districts and then 2 at-large, or how would that work?
It's certainly possible to do it that way. And then, 3 areas would of equal population. Each one would nominate and vote on one position, and the other 2 positions would be elected by everyone in the district.
Interesting.
Just on face value, it seems like a simple little thing like the first group, if the people that choose to run for the board are not, like I think your question, representative of the separate districts, that I'm kind of speaking out of turn, but it just seems that alone in Amity would be enough to say they'd kibosh the whole thing if there wasn't that idea that there's that. And I think Adam asked the question, though, that's just to start, and then you'd have another, that group of 5 would start it, and then you'd have another election that would decide where you're actually going to get the representatives.
You'd have to petition first.
Yeah.
To make different districts.
Yeah.
That first group would.
Yeah. And then,
But that first group would be the one that set it up.
right.
And even that wouldn't give you the geographic of this is the Amity Fire District and we get one representative it wouldn't be like the Wycombe board where you have, Mac County and like small cities and West Valley.
Right.
That's kind of what I envisioned was, maybe Mac has a few seats at the table, but then you have, whoever else is there, and if there was more partners, you'd collaborate those
Because
additional seats.
isn't YCOM set up with, they have fire, police, big city, small city, or how's it set up?
No, it's small cities, West Valley, McMinnville County.
They
I'm
have
missing one.
7? Do they have 7 or do they just have 5?
No, we have 5.
See, the problem with it is that election, there's not any one of the other cities that have enough election power to put anybody on the board compared to how many voters are in McMinnville.
Could I ask a question?
Sure.
When you start, isn't it all one big district, and so anybody from the district could run for office?
Correct.
Or are we looking at it just by the cities?
No, it'd be anybody from anywhere in the district. I mean, there could theoretically be 5 people from Lafayette that get elected.
So it shouldn't be an issue. I mean, they may not get elected, but anybody from the district
there's
can
only
run for the
2,700
and
voters.
possibly be an officer.
Yeah, there's only 2,700 voters in Lafayette. And there's how many voters in McMinnville?
I think what Kelly's getting at is somebody from Lafayette's current district could place signs anywhere in this new greater Yamhill Valley
I
district.
understand that. I understand
and
that.
get voters from Amity and from Mac Rural and from City of McMinnville. So it's really, you just have a bigger playground now that you need to promote yourself and not just within the bounds of Lafayette Fire District.
And the YCOM analogy, it's important to look at that because that's a fire authority model. That's a contracting model. That's where multiple agencies come together and contract with a host, which is kind of where we started this study way back 2.5 years ago, is that a district would form and others would form an RFA, and then at some point come in if and when that makes sense. And so, Mr. Riss, if you formed, let's just say a district formed, a small district, 2 jurisdictions, and other jurisdictions maintain their autonomy but wanted to contract in, could the district at a later time, once it's formed, they can't create districts with somebody that's not in there when they want to come in? I guess that's my point, the election boundaries.
If I understand the question, yes. A district could, in 3 years, so, whatever time period, they could choose to join the new district at a later time. There's nothing that prevents it. And under some provisions, if they consolidate or merge into an existing district, that whole district, sub-district for election purposes, that can be part of the formation or the merger consolidation election. It's just not set up that way for formation of initial district.
Right. So if you came in later, you could create an election, division, whatever you want to call it, an area, a district, as part of coming in at a later date. You could do that simultaneously if the district already exists.
Under some procedures, yes. It's there are multiple ways to create a district and to join a district, and some of those procedures do allow the sub-districts as part of the process.
Okay. Got it. So maybe we, at this point, need to just go around the table from the participating agencies and just allow you to share your thoughts, concerns, or questions, and see if we can begin to, hone in on what we think is a realistic direction for each agency, after leaving this meeting. So why don't we do that? Mayor, would you like to start and maybe just kind of share your thoughts and concerns and see if we can answer any questions you have? And
Well, to be honest with you, this last meeting and this meeting is the first time I've been involved in this stuff here. We had another representative that was doing that, but I have to take this back to the council and talk to the council.
Yes.
And we're going to do that in December, and I'm not sure that we would be up for this at this time.
And your
Yeah.
concerns center around the representation and the
Yeah,
the governance?
yeah, with the representation, you know, and I haven't been able to get into the financials to see what effect it is gonna have on my individual citizens.
Sure.
So, those are some things that I'm gonna have to do some legwork in the next couple of weeks before the next meeting.
Right.
But, I mean, I'm not saying that we would be, I'm not saying no to it, I'm just saying that we don't have enough yet to make a decision.
Right.
We have to go through this, and I know that most of my counselors haven't had the time to do that
Right.
yet.
Understood. Understood.
But I'm concerned about the fact that we're a little group, we're a little city of 4,000 people versus McMinnville has how many people?
34,000-ish.
34,000-ish and stuff like that. I get this big bear, little bear thing, and without what I feel is the proper representation is on the boards and stuff, I don't see how we could do it.
You know, there's a fundamental reality that when you form a fire district, each individual jurisdiction gets out of the fire protection business.
I understand that.
And so that needs to be obviously an educated decision. And once it's out, then you have to decide if there's proportional benefit, even if some of the electeds or some of the governing body do or don't come from the previous jurisdiction. However, I would say that it's important to measure the equity against what money is going into the system proportionally and how is that being used and distributed seamlessly. In other words, the board that's going to oversee this district should not be considering jurisdictional boundaries of previous districts or cities. They should be considering the regional response model, the risk profile, and the ability to serve the whole area at its best. And if they're doing that, then the money will distribute accordingly. But everybody's going to be bringing in proportional money. So I don't know at 2.0 what the city of Lafayette would be bringing in. I know that McMinnville will be bringing in about $8.5–9 million. And so that's gonna fund the majority of this district to be able to distribute to cover the whole area. So that's all. It's a fundamental perspective shift, and so I certainly can understand that. But I think it's important to keep that in mind that if you do participate, you're getting out of the fire business.
Another thing I would add, Marie, is you know, you look at our county commissioners, and they don't all come from McMinnville, even though we're the county seat.
I understand
We got
that.
one from Grand Island, which is probably the smallest voting area in the county. We got one from rural Newburgh, and we got one from Carleton. Granted, we have elected commissioners from McMinnville, but you know, just because where the voters are doesn't mean that's where the person that's going to resonate with the voters the most is going to come from.
Right.
And nothing you say is going to change my mind about being cautious about that.
Yeah. No,
Okay, because, you know, if, being a citizen myself, is if I'm gonna put that much money into a district, I want my city and my area represented on the board. One way or the other. Because of the fact that you can't, people in McMinnville can't, or people on the board can't necessarily understand what the citizens in Lafayette are doing. If we have representation, and I'm sure Amity would be the same way, you know, and the rural district would be the same way, they want to know that their personal, you know, issues are being addressed by someone that they trust and someone from their area. And that's just me personally.
Understood.
You know, and so and I'm not saying that that's a deal breaker or whatever. I'm just saying that I'm concerned about that.
The other side of that coin too is that if you're getting a service level by a fully staffed engine that your current taxing district can't fully support.
Well, that's not necessarily true. That's not necessarily true because we've never done any investigating about what it would cost us to do our own district. Whether it would be more than what you're asking for this district, or we have not done any of those calculations. So we don't know. We can't make a decision on it like that yet. I mean, we could start our own district. You know, I don't know how much it would cost. We would have to go through a cost evaluation and stuff like that. And maybe the citizens would be more interested in that than jumping into one with McMinnville. We don't know that yet.
Understood.
I sound like an old man here, but in 1990, I was the mayor of Amity, and in the exact situation as she is. And we didn't have half the tax money you had, but we couldn't, running the city with police, fire, and street and all that, we could not afford the fire. And so there was a vote, and we became part of the Amity Rural Fire District. So now it's all one Amity Fire District, which is rural and our city. But I'm kind of like her in that we are like, kind of like I think McMinnville Rural, in that we, maybe not quite, I think we've been able to survive who we are in a couple things. Representation is pretty big, but we're not, as the facts prove, we're not making response time standards and a steady, viable volunteer organization. And we contracted with McMinnville for its fire chief just for the idea of having a chief. And 2 years ago, it didn't seem viable to be able to hire our own chief. So it was more cost effective to do the IGA. But just the one thing that she's talking about, I really feel like would kibosh the whole thing if there wasn't some guarantee of, at least I think I speak for the Amity bunch, that if there wasn't some guarantee that in the initial start that there would be a representative that could speak for Amity. I think people would agree that need better response time. We need to have a staffed engine and all those things. But if they don't have any, if they feel like they don't have any say in it, they would say figure it out.
Yeah, local identity is huge. I understand that.
Mm-hmm. And that's what Sheldon and I talked about. And he's been through this. There will be some attrition. I mean, you're going to lose some volunteers just because we've done it all this way for all these years, and we don't want to be part of the big group. Yeah, and you'll have to overcome that. The issue would be, can you sell your voting public that all the good stuff that's going to come with it, and what I think has to be a big part of it is we will be represented. Even if we only have, like you're talking about the 9 million, even if we only have 500,000 of the rest of the money, they'll still want to have control of what they feel is their 500,000. Because our tax base in the Amity district wouldn't even come close to Lafayette. I mean, you guys are 4,000. I think we're more in the neighborhood of 2,500.
I think,
I think Amity was 1730.
Yeah, the city, but we have to include.
But the rural.
Yeah, all of it.
It pushes close.
if you, just to give you, because these are great points, and just to give you kind of perspective, the current operational millage rate for Lafayette is 1.37, almost 1.4, which produces about $530,000. If it goes up to 2, it would probably produce somewhere around, let's just say, 650. The cost of an engine company is about $1.5 million. So the stark reality is, when you start talking about a district, the money's flown from the center out, not from the outside in. The McMinnville, and those engines are going to benefit McMinnville, but you putting in 8.5 or 9 million is going to put those engines on the outside that can roll into town, as well as the truck company that can roll out of town. But when you look at a community funding, you're going to be putting in less than you're costing, both at Amity and at Lafayette. I mean, that's just a fact, and I understand the governance, totally get it. But things to consider.
You know, and I understand what you're saying, and those figures are good, I appreciate that, but, you know, it still comes back to representation.
Yeah.
Whether we're costing the group, whether our portion of the thing costs more than what we're putting into the kitty or not, we still want representation in that kitty.
Right. Completely understand.
You know, it was hard enough to sell our citizens on a $5 million fire station.
Sure.
And now asking them to add more to it, to take our fire service and give it to a district and not have anything to say about it, it's gonna be a tough sell.
Sure. Understood. Local identity, local control, and local history are always the greatest hurdles to overcome for any regional fire protection model.
Mm-hmm.
That's why there's so many models out there, like fire authorities and districts, et cetera.
You know, and I'm not saying this option would be good or bad for us or whatever. We have to go through and make our own decision. But one thing that, like he said, is a stickler is for doing all that stuff and no representation, it's a hard pill to swallow.
Understood.
Yeah, we wanted to add, you know, in the rural district, we've had those same notions for a long time. In fact, we thought, well, we're going to have somebody on the board that will protect us. Well, this is an interesting discussion because the board is a wild card. None of us, if we do this, we cannot control it. If the only people who run for election live on Main Street in McMinnville, then they're the only people who will run it. But it's likely that we'll get people running from all over, and then the voting power will hopefully disperse it. But I think that what Sheldon was saying a few minutes ago is really the high line, is that the new board has a fiduciary responsibility to protect the whole district from fire or fire prevention. And I think we have to have some faith in the integrity of whoever gets elected to do that. But then I had an idea, I don't know if this works, and maybe the attorney can help us. Is there any way we could put language into the charter or agreement or whatever that would bolster that notion of fiduciary responsibility of the whole district?
Mr. Riss, I'll let you, the question was, and I don't want to get it wrong, sir, so is there any way to build in some representative type language or something that would allow input or some sort of fiduciary input from the jurisdiction served by the district?
During the formation process, there is not a way to do the sub-districts as discussed before. I don't think that there is any formal way to create that kind of obligation. Certainly there could be some commitments made by various candidates perspective, but it's something that has to take place separate from the formation election. I mentioned earlier that during the process of some post-formation processes of adding districts, like a merger or consolidation, that the sub-districts can be part of the election process in those. Another one of those processes is if a city annexes into a district after that district is formed, that is another one of those election processes where a sub-district can be part of that annexation vote. But that all takes place after that initial formation election.
So what you're saying is that McMinnville could create the district, get the board, and let's say maybe a year down the road, we annex into it, and then we would get an election we could have a board member. Is that right? Is that what you're saying?
It wouldn't be McMinnville, it's
well, North Valley.
creating a district.
Yeah,
It'd be the voters of the territory that's voting on it. But once that district is formed, if another city who isn't part of the district wants to annex into the city or into that district, the question of sub-districts can be part of that annexation election.
Okay.
Okay. David, this is Rich. I'm going to rephrase the question that Steve asked. Can there be a, and I think it's kind of like, in my mind, it's what it is anyway, but his question was in the measure of the ballot or in the language of the new charter, that there's a identified requirement for the candidates to represent the entire district and as a fiduciary responsibility, not
I see.
play favorites, for lack of a better term. Does that make sense? Is there, I mean, by the nature of the fact that you're being elected to this new district, that is technically your role and your responsibility to represent the entire district. But is there something to put in language that would make people feel better that that's what the role is required to do?
I'd have to give some thought to that. I had never, I've never come across something like that. But the issue on the ballot is whether or not there's a formation of a district, not the membership of the board. Again, I think that's more of a political commitment made by individual candidates as opposed to formation process. But I'd be happy to look into that further to see if there's some possibilities to do that.
I know in some cases where a jurisdiction is not ready or willing to annex into a district, I was the fire chief of a district that served 5 incorporated cities, and they all contracted with the district. And we had a fire commission with representation from each jurisdiction, from one elected official and each city manager, who would sit, and then there was a procedural process that would dictate that they would see the budget, and you know, even though they were advisory, they didn't have any statutory authority to approve the budget. The board would not approve the budget until it worked through what we called the Executive Management Oversight Committee. So there are some different structures if everybody doesn't want to be part of the district but wants to be a contractor with the district. It's just a matter of timing and being able to formulate the district and do that at the same time. So there are different options out there for jurisdictions or other districts who don't want to be a part of the annexed district.
David, you were mentioning when down the road a city or district decides to annex in, there could be a sub-district formed during that annexation process, but that sub-district would still be falling under the same population guidelines as sub-districts, just like we talked about a little while ago, or that sub-district and that annexation would just be that geographic district?
Yeah, it is a population-based determination, not geographical. So the proposal, the idea of having sub-districts can be part of that election, because when a city is annexing into a district, both the city itself, but also the district have separate ballot measures to approve it. And so at the same time, there could be the sub-district issue. But they would have to be equal population.
Okay, thank you.
So just to clarify, in order for that to occur, let's just, for hypothetically, the larger community and the smaller community could come in to make it equal. A third of the larger community would have to be apportioned to that district. Is that
Correct.
accurate?
Correct.
Well,
I mean, maybe not mathematically, but.
Yeah, in order to have districts of equal population, the population would have to come from another part of the district.
Okay, thank you.
Gotcha. Okay, Amity, did you get to speak your piece?
I have been thinking about this. Chief has watched us struggle, and Adam kind of has been involved in some of our conversations. And I think that, it's just Ron Huber, board chairman, talking about what I feel like is happening on our board. I think when we initially started talking about this, it was probably for sure one person who was sitting next to me that was consolidation, and 4 that were, there was out of that 4, then there was probably 2 absolutely not, and then there was 2 that are just kind of trying to figure it out, sitting in the
Yeah.
whichever. And so I think we're more now towards all 5 are committed to going on with the process, but maybe for different reasons. And I think, again, I don't know, I haven't talked to anybody about this, but I feel like we're going to go all the way down the road to let our people decide. If that's what, if we're going to go, we'll go till November at least with a vote and let the people decide. We'll put all the facts out there. We'll present what we come up with in the next couple, 2 or 3 or 5 months, and let the people make the decision. And some board members might be 100% cheerleaders for consolidation, and some board members might say, but I can't tell them what to do or not do. But like I said, I think for me, I see that some of it doesn't take much thought to figure out that we can't keep going the way we're going,
Right.
and sustain it. We're a little different than McMinnville Rural in that right now we're close to that 2.0 mill with what we're doing with our levy and our bond and our tax base. So it's not going to be money-wise, it's kind of a wash even if we went for the 2.0.
Yeah.
But the bond would eventually go off, but you're still going to have to try to get a levy. Then if you're going to go on your own, you're going to have to get a levy every 5 years to keep the status quo going. And each time the levy is going to be pushing it.
Yeah.
And we've had tremendous success with our 2 levy votes over the last, the 2 that we've had, they've been like 70-30, the vote, which is way different than the whole state of Oregon.
Yeah.
So selling will have to, is this whole big thing we've been talking about is going to be a huge issue, and that is representation.
Right.
I think what Marie brings to the table is important to share that information about, and maybe some of the reason potentially why some of the other districts have said, yeah, I don't think we're in right now. I don't know, but that piece of it is huge for other districts who are thinking of joining in, consolidating, regionalizing kind of thing. And like, it's pretty clear, I think, for what you have provided for service right now, you're not meeting there. I don't think anybody in the consolidation is meeting standards that we need to be. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So all of us are looking for an improvement in our service level to all of our citizens. Now, I'd say our citizens meaning Amity, and you say your citizens meaning Lafayette, and his citizens meaning McMinnville. But when this consolidation happens, all those people are all the same. And it's hard to give up that power, control, identity, whatever you want to call it. But if you can, if between now and the time that vote happens, and there's a long time to go through, I would assume, I don't know, maybe even asking Dave or you on the thing, that there would be like an advisory committee made up of representations from these districts between now and then as to what they think things could be, how do we regionalize, how do we intergovernmental agreement between now and then, where you have a chance to share your feelings about that and about providing better service to your taxpayers so that your husband, your child, your grandchild, your brother, whatever drops, and you want the best service possible there as quickly as possible. If it can be better than what you can provide now, and even if you pass your next levy and you pass your next bond, this consolidation, from my perspective, and I have a historical perspective of actually being a member who's participated in about 7 of these, 8 of them if you go back 30 years ago. And almost every single one of them, the service has been improved significantly post-election and consolidation of whatever that group is. Now, there's still several that will hold back and wait and see and that kind of thing, and sometimes they come in and trickle in later. That's what 5 or 6 of these other ones that I've been a part of have seen. So if you can sell that to your taxpayers, to your volunteers, to whoever it is, then the big picture starts becoming a little bit more clear and less fuzzy. The identity piece, I think, is the one that I would identify with myself, the biggest part of it in seeing recent activities that have happened, such as McMinnville having furlough days and those kind of things have gone through where other districts out, we didn't have the service provided either, kind of thing, right? But so there is that us and them kind of thing, any way you look at it, and I have been a part of one of those huge Death Stars or whatever you want to call it kind of thing that you join a part of, but you have to understand that the larger portion of that, meaning the McMinnville population base, is also dissolving their ownership in their own fire service. And I think between now and that time frame where it goes to a vote, I think if the citizens, in meaning mayors, managers, board members, volunteers, all of that, if they don't feel that that service is going to be better than what they can provide right now, even passing bonds and levies and so forth, then I think that you live in those communities, McMinnville rural, the same thing, that if it doesn't look like it's going to be better, that I think the information being shared with your population that's going to be a part of that vote that has to pass the dissolution as well as the formation, correct? Correct. Then you're not going to pass it. And you really, that's where your control, your power kind of can be. But I do believe that in the bigger picture, and it would be in the best interest of the city of McMinnville, elected officials, the fire department, everybody there as well, to try to help persuade the entire bigger part of it kind of thing, even come election time for board members, of making sure there's some representation, whether it be 1, whether it be 2, whether it be 3, in a part of that bigger picture, that it's all a part of it. It benefits them as much as it benefits us in the bigger part of it. And one more perspective I'd put onto it is, if you just look back real close to us in this same county, Newburgh Rural, which is probably real similar to McMinnville Rural, that just joined a couple years ago in with the other Tualatin Valley Fire and Rescue District, they looked at the same thing. They're at the same thing as a very low millage rate compared to what you guys have or we have, and meaning Lafayette and Amity, and they had looked at that aspect like, well, what if we do it ourselves? Could we do this thing and provide it out there? And it was coming in about the 2 mil rate for joining the larger organization, and when they did look at it come through as to providing their own services, it would have, I mean, he just told you what, $1 million something for running one staffed engine company that could be provided, or at least closer than what you have now. And it was running upwards in the 3 to above 3 millage rate in order to do so. And when they looked at that aspect of it, they were like, well, this is a no-brainer. This is very clear. We're going to get better service than what we have now. We're going to pay more, but we're going to get better service, and we can't do it on our own. And that's why they ended up going that perspective. So I think what happens between now and then is the biggest portion of, if you don't feel that you're getting better service, that you're getting more, that you're getting whatever to provide for you, then I think your citizens wouldn't vote for it.
Yeah, but the question right now is that what is it going to cost us to go from now until November?
As far as this IAG, the processes?
Whatever it's going to cost us to get.
Let's talk about that. I want to, can we let everybody kind of say their piece though?
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, because I think that's an important question. I want to table another thing that was said, so we talk about it. And that is, if we don't have, if the group that's going to move forward doesn't have a great assurance, or one jurisdiction's not sure if it's going to pass, you need to have an honest dialogue about moving forward, because you'll sink the whole thing. And then the other thing, just a point of reference is, these board members are agnostic. I mean, no matter where they come from, there shouldn't be a representative for Lafayette any more than McMinnville. There should be fire district representatives that's going to serve the whole community. And you hopefully will have a fire chief and an executive staff who are going to run that organization quarterly, serving the whole district. Like I said, I've had firsthand experience of that, and I never made decisions based on one jurisdiction unless it was unique to that, but it was always for the good of the whole. But that all being said, those are great points. Let's give rural an opportunity, and then we'll let McMinnville kind of land the plane.
Regarding the representation, I've said my piece on that. We don't really have any problem with, I don't have any problem with that, and I don't think, it's never been a discussion at our board level about whether we would be represented properly or not, although we have always thought, well, we would have some sort of representation.
Sure.
The next subject you're about to bring up, though, I think, what we've always seen is the obstacle is price. And you just said something key to this, is that we got to have confidence that everybody's going to buy in. I don't think McMinnville Rural is going to have to explain representation on the board. I think we're going to have to explain why the service is worth $2.
Gotcha.
And that's a huge, you guys know what our tax rates are. That's a double our tax rate.
Right.
So that, and Mary asked a question briefly about what does it cost between here and November. I made the note, maybe you'll get to that next, is order of magnitude on legal fees and so on. Before we sign off on this, I don't think we can sign a blank check. We have to have some sort of idea, you know.
Understood.
Those are my comments at this
Okay.
point.
You have anything, sir? Okay. You want to kind of land the plane on the round table here with McMinnville?
Yeah, I definitely hear the local control and representation loud and clear, and understand that, but, overall, I think just we have to get out of our individual silos and look at it as a big picture of the overall district moving forward, and that it's not McMinnville's district, and it's not Amity's district, or Lafayette's, or Mackerel's. It's our district as a whole, of who's ever coming to the table, and all of our citizens are now as one. The concern I have is, Ron, you pointed out letting it run till November with your citizens, and the first step would just be, from the last 4 or 5 board meetings I've sat in on, is making sure the board's not just on the fence about it, but they're fully committed to move the narrative forward with the district, in unison and in lockstep with each other, and then making sure that we're all on the same page with polling, and that we're using the same polling agency, whoever that is. I don't know who that is, but we agree that we're comparing apples to apples when we go to polling, and then if there's a red flag in that polling that whatever jurisdiction doesn't poll well, that we agree for the success of the district as a whole, that jurisdiction is going to step back and maybe look at an IGA with this new district, and still being a partner and wanting to get into it, but that they realize it's too risky to proceed with that November 22 vote, would be my greatest concern, is that we are trying to bring in too many people at once, or bring in a partner that's just not quite ready from a political standpoint within their constituents, and making sure that we have the best foot forward for the success of the new district on the first go around.
I totally agree. I think that I maybe misspoke that we would stay in until the vote. Because one of the last things that a couple of us talked about after Tuesday night was, it would really be nice to know what our constituency feels like before we could say yay or nay. And that polling thing is a big deal. Because like I said, I don't think we're unanimous. We said we're going to keep on going. We kind of made that consensus agreement on Tuesday night after we had a special board meeting afterwards and just talked about some things, but we're kind of consensus about staying together, and not have this split people against them, against our IGA and all that. But let's keep going forward. But I don't think there's too many board members that want to speak for the whole district without knowing what. And I agree. I don't think we want to be the reason that the other thing fails.
Yeah.
We've been much on the same page. We keep saying, well, let's keep going because it looks interesting. But there's a lot of water going to the bridge before we get there. The polling is important, and I'm wondering where that lies on our time schedule, because maybe earlier is better.
Yes.
I was gonna say, I like that idea too, a good polling system that polls a good representation of these districts. Now that we're pared down to 3 additions other than McMinnville, I think that would be the best thing before anybody's decided to go forward.
We've got to have a pretty good definition of what we're asking the questions about.
Yeah, I agree. I think, did I interrupt you, Chief?
No,
I'm sorry.
Well, I would say, finish up on the thought that it came to me when we were just talking. The problem we have is that it's kind of a good problem because we're not having money issues.
Right.
And they've seen, the voters have seen that we can perform, but what Dean has been talking about, and other people have been too, is that the clear picture of what's really happening is not being seen. They're paying their taxes, but they're not sitting down at the fire station when the siren goes off and only one person shows up.
Right.
Well,
Right.
I'm not sure that our citizens would, not that they can't, but I'm not sure that they understand at this time response times as much as they should.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
You know, and if that information could get to the people quicker, or so in a form that they can understand, and then that probably will make a big difference.
Yeah.
You don't want it to happen, but it could be a catastrophe.
Yeah.
I mean, it may take a catastrophe for people to figure out, or somebody doesn't survive because like I said, we've had in the last month or so. Scott could probably affirm what I'm saying is that we've had 8 or 10 people show up on a Tuesday afternoon for an ambulance call, and then on Friday night at 12 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night, when you think most people are home, only one person shows up for a fire.
Right, and that's a problem. So a coordinated, unified educational process has got to be a key part of this. And so that's a good segue into kind of the next topic I want to cover, and then we will eventually land this thing.
We never talked about the dollar figure first.
Okay. So
Does anybody have an estimate?
Mr. Riss, do you have any sort of a ballpark on what you think from a legal perspective, and if you have any insight on Oregon political consultants? I mean, I can give a guess on what I've seen for similar districts. You're looking at probably, $20,000, $30,000 for polling and political consultant through the election. And I don't know on the legal side.
Yeah. Thank you. On the polling side, or campaign issues, of course, you have to be careful about the use of public funds when there's an election. So some of that, at some point, public funds cannot be used. I can't speak to the cost of that. I was able to make some contacts with people I know and provided some possible options to the chief about people in that business, but I don't have any personal experience with them. As far as the legal services, how much that could be, it is very difficult to tell. I heard mention of a bond with one of the districts. That adds to the complexities of, how much, how is that going to be dealt with? I would say ballpark, if it went through all of the different processes, I could see the legal fees being $10,000, $20,000, but it's difficult to know without getting into the weeds. And there hasn't been an opportunity to do that as of yet.
Right.
Yeah, so you're talking $30,000, you said, for the political part of it?
20 to 30, depending on how much polling you do, a lot of variables,
Right.
but I would, if you kind of want a ceiling, I'd say 25-ish, and maybe 20 to legal, so but let's go with 45.
We ran a poll here in the city of McMinnville a year ago, 6 months ago. A little less than that. And I believe we paid $30,000 or $35,000 for a telephone poll. Now, David has provided me with the name. I have some email requests out for some information from a firm that does polling and political consulting. The one that we used to use has retired from the industry. So I'm waiting for some feedback on them, and if I get prices, I'll get that out to you as to what that looks like. They have a variety of other options besides telephone polling, which is the preferred method of Campbell and DeLong. They do telephone polling, but they also do some other internet polling and those types of things that are at a lower cost according to their information on their site. I can have that information. And the other thing that I wanted to bring up when we were talking about the coordinated education and messaging process, I was just talking with Mr. Towery. We have a young lady who is our information, communications manager, who helps message the city's stuff, and he's allowed me to tap into that resource for our group to work on some of the educational things that we're talking about. Obviously, to work through the group and help get the message out to the jurisdictions, maybe prior to the poll or around the same time as the poll, so the information is fresh in their head while they're having the polling going on.
Yeah, I think the education and the poll thing would be the first thing to go, and I could sell, I mean, I could, you know, I think that my counsel would go for that step, and then they would like to make their decision at that point in time as to which way to go.
Okay?
Yeah, let's say it was over, it would cost.
So, another consideration is there needs to be the appropriate people at the table if you're going to move forward, and you need to have them there from the beginning. And just as a rule of thumb, you definitely are going to need staff at the table, but staff is limited in what they can do. They can't advocate, they can only inform. They can put out information. But when it comes to actually educating, and not educating, but selling or advocating for this ballot measure, it's going to have to be the directors, the volunteer associations, and the labor association. They're the ones that really need to be at the table from the beginning to determine if they're going to help carry the water or not.
Labor associations, what do you mean?
The union, McMinnville's union, as well as volunteer agencies, you know, volunteer associations that you probably have within your individual organizations, and then certainly staff, and then the electeds, because you all are going to have a role to play in this, and this is where a political consultant or the communication consultant can help you choreograph this. But there's certain things you can and can't do, and legal counsel will have to weigh in too. But you need the ballot working committee to move this forward. So I think if you're going to work in order of events to try to get to November and determine who's in and who's out, you know, maybe you do some initial polling, but I would encourage you to bring a ballot working group together with all the right people at the table and start talking about it. Because quite honestly, we need to know if there's a or they need to know. I'm out wrapping up tonight, but I've done my part. But if you have a volunteer association that's going to spearhead, you know, that's going to take this thing on and oppose it, you need to know that up front. And quite honestly, you need to back out, because that's just not going to work, you know. And it's the same with labor and everybody else. I mean, you really have to determine whoever's at the table has to be committed to moving this thing across the line. It's the hardest thing to do, as you've learned. It's the easiest thing to kill. And so you have to eliminate that potential, or you'll never get it off the ground. And that's a hard conversation, but that's the truth.
My perspective on that, when you do a polling kind of a thing, is I don't think you really just want to do one polling.
Correct.
Thing. You almost want to do a pre and post kind of a thing before your message goes out. Find out what people know now, and you'll find out how much they don't know.
Yep.
And that helps with your message that you put out across to all the people.
Yep.
And spend some time doing that and educating. And by the pre-poll, you figure out what don't they know, or what's already in here and available that people are saying, well, I don't know this much. And you're like, well, we just did that.
Yep.
And so once that information gets out there and the same message is shared in Lafayette, Amity, Mac Rural, all of them, then do a polling post your education information piece and see what changed into the thing. And I think if you're sitting in that perspective then and you're like, yeah, nothing changed, well, then the information didn't help at all.
Yeah.
But
And those polling agencies, that's what they do. They can tell you exactly what question to ask, when to ask it, what follow-up question to ask, and they'll give you a probability based on the answer as to who's in and who's out. So they're really good at that.
And it almost always is more beneficial, and there's almost always change after the right message is put out. But if you're just throwing stuff out there and you don't know what they really don't know, then you're wasting your time and money and pushing your resources for the information.
Right. Chief,
Can I clarify one thing real quick? When we're talking about this cost with it, you're saying, I'm hearing that McMinnville is absorbing 70% of that, and these however many other agencies that are gonna be in a part of it kind of thing would be splitting the 30%, is that correct?
For the attorney's fees.
Attorney's fees,
For
yeah.
polling, we each would be responsible for our own jurisdiction's cost for the poll.
Sure, yeah.
But even though we're all each responsible for our own, it's still, I feel it's still important
use the same.
that we all use the same polling agency and the same type of polling.
Oh,
So
I think it should be a group effort.
Yeah.
I don't think we should, this one over here and this one over here and this one over here,
It
no.
would probably be more cost effective in doing that as well, I would assume.
I'm sure that they can do one poll for everybody and then split the data between the different cities and jurisdictions.
Yes, and they're very
Yeah,
effective at
and
doing that, yeah.
Having the same person ask the same questions, you get a better, I think a more consistent response.
Yeah.
No, I
So,
agree.
Mr. Rist, does this cost-sharing agreement allow or enable, if the decision was made that if you sign this, it'll be with the intent to do some initial polling, to do some adjustments if needed as to who's in and who's out, and then move forward? I mean, is there anything in this that would preclude from doing early polling before you do any legal work, or?
Absolutely not.
Okay. Okay. Is there any opposition or concern if you were to leave here tonight pursuing this agreement with the understanding you're gonna do polling first? Try to get some information and then move into the actual legal formation once you know if everybody's staying? Is that a problem?
I think my counsel would go for that.
Really makes sense.
Yeah.
Mr. Riss, if we've got to get these petitions in May, how quick do we need to turn around this polling so that you'll have time to put together what needs to get put together, including these petitions?
Well, the petition has to be submitted in May.
Okay.
And we have to come up with the description, boundary descriptions, which we have to have for the existing districts as well as the new district, and that has to be approved by the Department of Revenue. I have heard that surveyors are not are taking a long time right now to get to projects, so that could be a time factor.
Okay.
We have to actually develop petition forms. That won't take terribly long to do and get it approved by the county. It's really getting the petition signed by the requisite number of people. That could go slow, that could go quickly, depending on how many folks you have out there collecting a signature. The sooner we start, the better. I'd have to spend a little bit of time trying to calculate that out, but if we were anything beyond, I would think February, I'd become concerned if there would be enough time to get it all accomplished, particularly with the boundary descriptions.
Correct. So that leaves you really December and January to do some sort of polling, pulse check, whatever you want to call it. And then after you do that, determine who's going to push away from the table, and then do your boundaries and go.
Well, we have a council meeting on the 8th, I believe it is, and so I'll have an answer right after that. But I can't make any
Of course,
decisions.
yeah, no, I
tonight.
understood. But is there a desire or is there agreement or any problem with everybody taking this back to their bodies saying, this is the parameters, it's 70-30 for legal, it's paying for our own polling, we're gonna do polling first in December and January, and then by February, we gotta be ready to draw district boundaries or withdraw if the polls don't look good.
I don't have any problem with it.
Chief, does that work? Jeff, any problems?
I think that works, for me, yeah.
Amity?
Yeah.
Okay. Ms. Kelly, I know you're on the line. Are you okay with this direction?
Yes, I am fine with this direction.
Okay.
Sounds good.
Okay.
So everybody would come to their decision by their first February meeting is what I'm hearing?
No, everybody's gonna take this to their next meeting.
No,
and
I mean
oh,
their decision from their polling. If they decide
Yes.
at their next meeting to move forward, their December meeting,
Yes,
polling moves forward, and then everybody's gonna know by their first meeting in February with their polling data
correct.
if they're in or they're out.
Yeah.
I will follow up with the polling company tomorrow on some of the emails that I sent, try and get, some information and content, some
That'd be
quotes
great.
and pricing, and timeframes, and, question development. Last time I think it was about a month of prep or.
It's gonna be a really tight window, but it's a pretty focused poll.
Right.
We're not asking about 16 different services.
Right.
I can speak to, personally, I'm elder in a church in Amity, and we're trying to partition off 2 pieces of property off of our big, we have about 8 acres. We started the 1st of September with a renowned, not infamous, but very famous land surveyor for Yamhill County, and we're not there yet.
Okay.
So that's 3 months, just for a
Does-
2-lot partition.
Mr. Rist, does that have to be done by a land surveyor? Could we have our GIS people do the long and lats? Because we've got the shape files already of the new district, of just about any combination
It
you can
doesn't
think
have
of.
to be done by a licensed surveyor, as long as you come up with description. The description has to be reviewed by a part of the Oregon Department of Revenue. That's their job, is to check those boundary descriptions.
Okay.
They're very exacting in their review.
Yeah.
But they work with you to get it accomplished. So it can be done by non-surveyors if they have a good sense of how to put those together.
Right.
So we'd be able to skip that.
Well, I mean, if we could get either us or somebody who's got the GIS and the expertise to do the description properly.
For each district, I know Amity, we know where our lines are.
We've got it all. I mean, we've analyzed it every way but sideways.
It's all in, all the data's in.
Yeah.
One GIS person did.
Yeah. So it's just a matter of writing the description correctly, which I'm sure we could find somebody to do using an Oregon template. So, all that to say, I don't think you'll have to, I think we can get that done quick. We can help you there.
And the polling's taking the temperature of your constituents, but you still need to make sure that, you know, your labor, your volunteer organization, and your board, or, you know, whether it's the council or your district board is in as well, and not, I mean, your citizens could be in, but if your volunteer, or for us, our union is out for whatever reason,
And it's over.
that's out for you as well, you know. So I'd just keep that in perspective as you're moving along, to make sure that we're all moving in unison.
Okay,
Sheldon, can I ask a question on the timing of this again?
you most certainly
Just
can.
my own, clarification. You're suggesting that we execute this document now and then do the polling, or do the polling before we do anything with this
No,
document?
execute the document, we're requesting you to execute the document at your next meeting,
Right,
which will simply say that for legal fees, it's a 70-30 split. For polling, you'll pay your portion.
right?
We have general agreement with the parties. We're gonna do polling first before we rack up any legal fees.
Right?
We're gonna get that done as quickly as possible to do a pulse check, determine if we've got any problem entities.
Right?
If you don't have any problem entities, then you'll start drawing up the district boundaries and moving on the
Right.
petitions.
But if at that point you decided you wanted to withdraw, is this agreement as it's currently written allow that?
Good question. Mr. Riss? So if they take this IGA back to their bodies and they approve it with the structure we just determined, we're gonna go do some initial polling and then start the legal formation, and the polling doesn't look good and they push away, are they still bound by this agreement for legal fees, or do we need to change this?
think there would be, I've obviously been doing a bit of work today, but other than that, it's somewhat up to the city of McMinnville how they would like to invoice that. I wasn't going to be doing any legal work until I heard from the chief to do more.
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, exactly, but I think the question is if we do the initial polling and, organization X doesn't look good and they've got opposition and they decide, or the group decides we can't do it, so they're gonna withdraw. Now we're gonna, in February, we're gonna draw the district lines and move forward with the formation documents. Would they still be on the hook for those legal fees, or is there a way to put something in here that would let them off if they agree with if they disengage with mutual agreement?
My apologies. Yes, the agreement actually does have a provision for withdrawal. It also has joining if someone wanted to join later, but it does have a provision with withdrawing. Let me see if I can
Yeah, but it
find
says
that
here,
quickly.
upon termination, the terminating party shall pay its share of administrative support incurred to date of termination, but otherwise owe no further obligations to other parties. Okay, but
So
what
you'd be
is,
responsible for your polling.
yeah, we would be responsible for the polling, but nothing else. I
You'd
would
be
assume.
responsible for, any legal fee, 70/30 for tonight, and then any polling. But we're not gonna do any district formation legal work until we do the initial polling.
Okay.
That satisfies my question. I hadn't read.
I didn't see it either, but it was a good question. Okay. So it looks like we've arrived. It looks like everybody's gonna take this back to their next meeting for approval. We will get polling done as quickly as possible with a deadline to start the district formation in February. And we'll see what it looks like. And in the meantime, there is opportunity, and I would encourage you to bring a working group together just to start putting the educational pieces together.
Actually,
Yes,
for the educational component,
yes.
whoever you would like us to be, the point of contact for your organization, please make sure Chief Hanneman has that information before you leave.
Yes.
So that we can coordinate Noel and our messaging and start having, maybe even have a couple of Zoom meetings and start having some dialogue. We'll pull most of the information will come directly on the work that's already been done, but it's what does it look like and how we message it as far as the group perspective, not an individual organization's perspective.
Well, and that's, I think I need to talk about this for a minute. Chief and I did a moment ago. We talked about staff resources and representation and so on, and you're looking at it for us.
Right.
And, we're not into this full time.
Understood.
I guess what I'm asking the rest of the group is, if we come along on this project, we want to, one, be sure that the people who are representing it are representing the whole group fiduciarily, just as I said the board would.
Right.
And the work is gonna get done, and we're not gonna be able to sit at every meeting, by no means. What do you guys think of that? Is there any response to that?
When you say every meeting, you mean meetings outside your jurisdiction?
Well, I'm not even sure what all meetings we're gonna have yet.
Okay.
But meetings that we're not professional firefighters.
This working group, yeah.
We don't know some of the answers to some of the questions that will come up when we talk about training and communications. Fire prevention, EMS, those sorts of things.
That's your fire
The
department's
operations.
job.
Right, so when we get into some of those minor committees or subcommittees, that's where the operational members of the departments that are going to be moving the organization moving forward,
Right.
they would be assigning a training officer for the training component, a fire prevention officer, or a chief for the prevention stuff.
Okay.
That's those types of meetings.
I guess what I'm saying to the group, we won't be able to participate, we won't be able to contribute to that.
But you will get the reports back on the work done by the.
And you guys don't have any problem of doing that on our behalf at that point?
They're your fire department. You contract with them.
Right,
So they're gonna do that on your behalf
okay,
until you figure out if you're in this district or what happens.
sure.
And so what I would say is, and I want to be clear because the chief brought up a great point, we're asking you to put together a ballot working committee that's really gonna work on the polling and moving this to the next step in February, and getting the parties at the table, talking to them while you're doing this polling. You gotta get them in early. Once we get to February and we decide who's in and who's out, and we submit the new district boundaries, then you need to put together your implementation committees, which is your operations, communications, governance, finance, and that's where you start working through some of the details, so that you can communicate that out and make sure that you're ready to go in November, if it's approved. Because you can't wait till it's approved to figure out how it's going to work. You won't have time.
I have just one clarification. Okay, we're talking 30%, which is our group. Okay, now, is that Lafayette, Amity, and then McMinnville Rural? So it would be 10% each?
Yes. That's right. Yeah, yes, that math works.
Sorry about that.
Well, I just had 15%, and I'm going, wait a minute, we've got a third person there. I didn't know if they, so, yeah, so I just wanted to make sure it's 10%.
Yeah.
Yeah, looking at that big picture, it's not that much money.
It doesn't make any difference
Yeah.
with my group.
No, I know, but I'm saying it makes a difference if you're having to spend $30,000 on something that we're not.
Sheldon, did you say you had a shape file for all the stuff?
We've got everything.
All right,
We've manipulated this thing so,
we have,
many ways. Yeah.
the city has a GIS guy that if we already.
Well, we can give you the files if you want to take it from here,
If-
so, yeah.
If you have those shape
Oh, yeah.
files, we have a GIS person that
Yeah.
we can use.
Perfect.
Maybe expedite that process once we're there.
Yeah, we can get those all to you. All right. Have we landed?
I'm done.
So we'll have a ballot working, or we'll have a working group right now for polling. That's
So, yeah, I call it a ballot working group, but it's basically, you need to get all the interest to the table to work with the pollster. And so you need to have district representation, city representation, labor representation, volunteer representation. You need to have all the stakeholders that are gonna have to carry this thing or have the potential to try to hurt it at the table, so you can work with your pollster.
And as soon as we have a pollster online and able and willing and is ready to move forward, I will contact those folks that give you kind of their name, and we'll get the group put together.
Beautiful.
Now, remember, we won't have an answer until after December 8th.
Oh, well, no, I understand, that's fine. That gives me a chance to work through some dialogue with the pollsters.
That's a whopping 2 weeks.
Yep.
I don't want to get any hopes up or whatever, I'm saying, you
I
know.
understand. And obviously, the initial dialogue is going to be not me making a commitment on everyone's behalf until everyone is given the approval. It's going to be a preliminary dialogue with the pollster on, are you capable, are you willing, what's your time frame, can you do it or not, in the time frame that we need it done.
Then they can give us.
And then we would
give you an
have meetings for
estimate
those
what's
that are
gonna
in to
cost.
say, these are some of the questions we think are important for our community, and
Right.
kind of massage what the polling looks like.
So I think, if you heard Marie, we would be able, like our meeting on December the 13th, we would be able to tell them how much it's gonna cost to poll.
Yes, we should have that number by then.
Okay.
Yeah, I will do everything I can by December 1st to have a number, at least an estimated reasonable number from a vendor on what the polling, or what polling options would look like with prices.
That would be great.
Yeah.
All right. Everybody's been extremely professional and constructive. This was a great dialogue. This is a good direction. And I think you guys are doing due diligence and have done due diligence. So thank you to all of you. And unless there's something that someone else needs to talk about or say, we'll go ahead and adjourn.
Thank you.
Okay?
David, are you available tomorrow at all? For a quick phone call?
Yes, we can talk about schedule.
Okay, thank you. I'll email you in the morning.
All right.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone who's watching. Thank you, Ms. Minky. Thank you, Mr. Riss, and everybody who's here.
Thank you.
Recording stopped.
Super done?